Welcome to the Zeta Report here on USA Emergency Broadcasting Network. We are live the first Monday of every month. You can catch us on our Blog Talk Radio site, 5 o'clock Eastern Time for the Zeta Report with Nancy Leader, who I'm going to bring to air before. I mentioned that we are also simulcast on usaebn.org. My name is Andre. I'm with USAEBN. I'd like to welcome to the show Nancy Leader of ZetaTalk.com, who's been on our show before for the first Monday edition of the Zeta Report and going forward. So welcome to the show, Nancy.
Oh, I'm thrilled to be back. And I wanted to mention, in partnership with USAEBN, Zeta Talk and the Zeta Report will be discussing the challenges of living on a planet beset with change, rising seas, increasing earthquakes and volcanic activity, weather gone wild, and the worry of what to do in a worst-case scenario. We will also inject Zeta Talk prophecy on what is coming next and advice on readiness plans and safe locations. Whenever Zeta Talk is quoted, please remember that prophecy is not fact. It is opinion. It only becomes fact when it happens. The Zetas are remarkably accurate, but have been wrong on occasion. Bear that in mind. For more information on this subject, please visit ZetaTalk.com or the Zeta Report on YouTube. In addition, questions from the chat and issues raised in the chat will be addressed toward the end of the hour after the main feature has been presented. This month, we're going to talk about houseboats, one of my very favorite subjects, a very, very important subject, not just because of rising seas, but because of the deluge flooding rivers. So often, that people just find themselves floating downriver or sitting on top of rooftops. Should you be a modern-day Noah? Oh, yes, you should. Houseboat living is used around the world along coastlines, rivers, and inland lakes. Mobility, access to fishing, and being near the water are the reasons, but in the future, houseboats may be lifesavers. With rising seas and heavy deluge on the increase, it is also a logical step, even inland. One can prepare for a water world with scraps and junk, being a modern-day Noah. Hey, why wait? Make it a fun project. Houseboats, like all boats, float because their bottoms displace enough water to create buoyancy. This is why heavy steel ships float. Their overall weight is less than the water being displaced. It's a scientific fact. A concrete flat bottom with a lip all around the edges works just fine for a houseboat. Many homemade houseboats add airtight flotation devices, too, for insurance, using a combination of flotation techniques. So to float your boat, you only need a hull or objects under the houseboat that hold air. Everyone is familiar with inner tubes used in swimming pools or to float down rivers on hot summer days. But are you aware that those old soda bottles are a flotation device? Plastic degrades under sunlight, but underwater has a long life. Tie them under the houseboat and you're in business. Western houseboats use long metal pontoons, but sealed wood hulls and lightweight bamboo work as well. Bamboo floats, and there's lots of wood that floats very readily. Some will sink, but the reason that boats are made out of wood in the main is it floats. Lined with plastic and sealed with grouts in the cracks, one can build flotation boxes under the houseboat, too. There are many plans available on the web. Try buildahouseboat.com, buildahouseboat.com. Once you have a floating platform, the house part can take many forms. Build a shack or just raise a tent at the last minute, or, use a tarp hung over a rope. If you're shy about being Noah or inland and just assembling the pieces for a quick trip to the water, or anticipating river flooding and deluge to float the whole neighborhood, you can be discreet, below the radar of any ridicule your neighbors might throw at you, and we know Noah got ridiculed. People forced into boats and cast adrift are epitomized by the Rohingyas, who are Bangladesh folk living in Myanmar, just nearby over in what used to be Burma. Myanmar, for religious differences, I believe they're Buddhists, is forcing them to sea in rowboats. But when they arrive back in overpopulated Bangladesh, they are again rejected. Very sad. It's been in the news. And there they sit in what looks like large rowboats, desperate, no fresh water, nothing to eat, the women and the children, and oh dear. So I was a little surprised at that because I thought Buddhists were peaceful, but the Buddhists are kicking out the Rohingyas, who are somehow a Muslim sect. And so, thousands of the Rohingyas then are trying to migrate down the coast, the Malay Peninsula, and then they get robbed, drowned, mass burial graves on shore. My goodness, if they had built houseboats out of junk, they could be living along the coastline and a floating community, and wouldn't that be better? Communities of houseboats can and have been formed. Houseboats can link together, tie up together, especially if not moored along a coastline. In other words, it's a free-floating community in a lake or even in the oceans. An example is a grouping in Vancouver. Let me quote from an April 2015 article titled, "This is How to Really Get Away from It All." And I quote, "A Canadian couple have ditched busy city life to live on a colorful, off-the-grid float home and a garden they've dubbed Freedom Cove, a completely self-sustainable float home consisting of 12 platforms that house wooden structures, greenhouses, and living spaces, all interconnected through a wooden pathway. During winter months, the couple collects rainwater for drinking, and in the summer they collect drinking water from a nearby freshwater waterfall across the bay. They have several greenhouses in which the family grows fruit and vegetables year-round. Electricity is supplied to their homes through solar panels and photovoltaic energy generators." Wow. And it doesn't matter. Rain, deluge, the water rising and falling, rising seas, they laugh. They are safe and secure, and they're portable. If they wish to move their community, they can. An example of just how strong a houseboat buoyed by tight air plastic bottles can be is one that hit the news in November 2014. Offshore from Cancun, Mexico, this houseboat has everything. Let me quote from an article titled, "No Man is an Island." And I quote, "He spent the past 7 years carefully constructing a floating eco-paradise, complete with a hot tub and internet connection, out of 150,000 recycled bottles. The three-story house on the island boasts 2 bedrooms, a hot tub, 3 shell showers, a kitchen, and working internet." You got to see the picture of this because he's actually building an island. It's in an area where mangroves grow, and they've attached mangroves have their roots in salt water, and they root down, in flooded areas where the tide comes in, so that it's not really technically land, but the land is down there a few feet underneath the high tide. And after a while, because of the mangroves, it becomes land. In other words, mangroves grow the shoreline out. So they're doing that there on that Cancun big houseboat. It's so charming. And I quote again from the article, "It is surrounded by palm trees, mangroves, fruit trees, and edible herbs and plants which all grow from the sand and soil of the handmade island. Solar panels now provide electricity. There's a lot of physical labor involved in keeping it up, especially in the early years before the mangrove roots weave through the base and strengthen everything." And that's the end of the quote from the article. Mangroves build soil, so while dangling their roots in the salt water and drifting around, this houseboat, if it connects with a sandbar or something like that, it will root and actually will become an island. So, cool, right? Cement boats. Operation Atlantis was a community houseboat experiment from the 1960s, revived in 1993, and again being revived in 2009. This design has a ferro cement base, big flat base, with air-filled steel ballast pillars underneath on all four corners. So instead of using pontoons, and you see a drawing of this, you see that on the four corners there's this pillar going down, which is an empty cement ballast filled with air.
Right.
Let me quote from an article called Floating Utopias on the Cheap. And I quote, "There was Operation Atlantis in the late 1960s, started with a ferro cement boat that made a single successful voyage on the Hudson River. The Oceana City Project, a plan for a vast floating settlement off the coast of Panama, emerged in 1993. The project was disbanded the following year due to lack of interest and funds. There's the Freedom Ship, a mile-long floating tax haven, which will come into being just as soon as its organizers can drum up the $10 billion needed to build it." End of the quote. Well, just goes to show you that you can use cement as a base, but you wouldn't want to just, a 6-inch lip, around the end of the cement. What happens if you get high waves and the water is on top of the cement base? Well, you're likely to find that you're going under. So that's great for putting up a building and having a nice smooth platform, but you need flotation underneath. But junk works. There's a lot of stuff that floats. We're just getting around to that. Big money is not necessary, not the $10 billion needed to float, this project, or not even any money at all. Houseboats can be built from junk, used lumber, plastic bottles heading for recycling, items from demolished homes sold for scrap. The results look a bit like the pirate ships of old. Avast, ye hearties, heave to. Let me read from an article titled "Swimming Cities, Floating Trash or Modern Pirate Treasure?" ? Well, it looks like a fun boat. When you see it, you just want to live there. And I quote, "Set against the backdrop of a contemporary city skyline, this ramshackle collection of recycled parts looks as much like a half-sunk pirate ship, a pile of floating debris, as it does a functional floating hobo-style hodgepodge home." End of the quote. Well, people live on it. And you fish. You have vegetables in container gardening on your deck. And why not? I guess sewage is taken care of naturally. By that I mean it gets dumped in the water.
Right.
And
recycled.
And recycled.
Yep.
Right. That's what the fish do. It becomes fish food in a manner of speaking, I guess. Not that the wealthy plan to go, that route, not building from junk. Not at all. Floating homes for the wealthy have also been in the news, and we're not talking about yachts. Massive floating cities bedecked with every amenity, including palm trees growing along the sun decks. Let me quote from a November 2003 article titled "Florida Man's $10 Billion Plan to Build a Floating City for the Wealthy." The ship will be 25 stories high, over 1 mile long, and will feature an airport to ferry passengers and residents on and off the boat. Because of its size, it will not be able to enter ports. It will have to be moored off the coastlines of the cities it travels to. The Freedom Ship would circumnavigate the globe once every 2 years. End of the quote. Do these floating communities for the wealthy grow their own food? This will be their downfall, as the movie Waterworld portrays. Remember, I'm not sure if everybody's familiar, but it was one of my favorite movies, and they had this big metal oil tanker where they had cans of Spam that they were living on. and everybody
Mm-hmm.
else was, retrieving whatever junk they could and building, little catamarans or junk boats or pirate vessels or whatever, and trying to grow a tree or a tomato plant or whatever. But this big oil tanker, which was it was symbolically supposed to indicate what's wrong with our world, that we have rising seas and global warming, etc., and it's all because of oil. So, oil is the bad guy, and they were eating spam. Would a
Yeah.
world such as portrayed in Waterworld develop? Well, I don't think so. I mean, they had everything flooding. How even with how would that happen? You'd have to have the crust of the earth go under the water instead of be where it is. And the reason that we have land masses is because that rock strata is light enough that it pokes up. There's heavy plates and there's light plates, and the light plates poke up, and the heavier plates sink, and water goes into the low-lying levels, and there we are. That's why we have oceans. So there are there are regions of the world susceptible to rising seas due to their lower elevation and lower than other parts of the globe. This includes the Canadian far north, the Mississippi Valley, and the state of Florida, and the Amazon basin and Siberia. In the opinion of the Zetas, Indonesia and India are also susceptible due to those plates being pushed down during plate movement. The scripted drama described by the Zetas. In the opinion of the Zetas, we are headed for rising seas caused not by global warming, but because of sliding crust creates heat from friction. Warmed water swells temporarily and takes up more room than cold water. Therefore, the sea level will rise, in the opinion of the Zetas, to up to 675 feet above the current level. And we can note that we had a prior USA EBN broadcast on May 4th of this year where we talked about how much land it can be seen just under the water. Land that was once above the waves, now under the water. Around Indonesia, around the UK, off the eastern coast of the United States, the Caribbean. There used to be a land bridge from Florida all the way down to Venezuela, for instance. This can and happen, and because it has happened before. So don't be shy about being a modern day NOAA. You at least get your base and your flotation together. You don't have to put up your tent. You don't have to build your little shack. It doesn't have to be obvious. People can say, "What's that out there?" And you just say, "Well, I'm putting up together a swimming pool, but it's taking me a while. It's all under wraps for now." And get started.
Tell them you're building an ark. I'm building an ark.
I'm building an ark. People are doing that. People are doing that around the world. Yeah, yes. There was one in, I think, the Netherlands. There was an ark, and in various places. And sometimes they try to make it like a carnival atmosphere, like, all right, I'm selling tickets, come and see my ark. But people are doing this, yes. And as I mentioned in these articles, even the wealthy, they are. If they're building floating cities, why? They know what's coming, and they're prepared to vacate and be safer out there in the ocean. That you should see these things. They go. It's like the cruise, where you have several layers of apartments and all look out on the water and water slides and all that. But it's more than that, because it's supposed to be a year-round living structure. So they know what's coming.
Hiding in plain sight.
That's right, hiding in plain sight, right. Well, they can't grow their food, and that's what the issue is. And we have discussed that here also on USA ABN, how your food is so much, Mother Nature just provides. We all think that you have to have a garden with lettuce and tomato plants and, this, but weeds are very high in vitamins. And also things like blue-green algae or duckweed. Duckweed grows as kind of like a scummy appearance on swamps. I don't believe it's a saltwater. I know it's not a saltwater. It's highly nutritious. It has proteins even, and there's companies that are making this, drying it and grinding it up into a powder. So who would think? I look across the road where we have a marsh, and it's covered with this gorgeous pea green in the summer, and the ducks are out, the wild ducks are out there paddling around. That's duckweed, and it's watercress is not the only thing that grows along the inland waterways. Very, very nutritious. So you can seaweed, kelp. If you're out on the ocean with your houseboat or you're a houseboat community, people in Japan, they walk up and down the beaches. They collect what the wind and surf wash in, seaweed, and wrap their sushi in it. And it's extremely nutritious, very high in iodine. You just have to be aware of what's there for the pickings, so to speak. Mother Nature provides.
Yeah, and one thing about houseboats too is also ties into smaller, more tight living quarters, obviously, because you can't build a huge, ark. If you had unlimited funds and unlimited supplies, you could in time. But it also ties into have you noticed, Nancy, too, that there's been a tiny home or a tiny house movement over the past, I'd say, like 15 years, maybe 10 years, really? I wonder why that is.
Recently,
people getting more efficient.
Right, and it's been in the major media like the Daily Mail and various publications, and I think it's only been in the last 5 years or so, it'll show that people have built something in their backyard. They can hook it on the back of their car, just like you might pull your rowboat, to go fishing, in a nearby lake, that portable, and then maybe they unfold it a little bit, but and it's so cute. You get in and there's a little sleeping quarter up, a little ladder toward the back, a little kitchen thing, then you sit on the back porch, and they make a big deal out of how people do not need huge spaces. They've even talking about housing for the homeless in cities like New York City, where it'll be I don't think they were shipping containers, but they're small boxes, stacked one on top of another or lined up, and everybody has their little efficiency apartment, very small. We don't need the big spreads that we're led to believe. You got to have the big yard, and you got to have the rec room, and you've got to have the living room and the dining room and the family room, and everybody's got to have a huge bedroom, and people basically have a bunk bed kind of a thing, where people stack the kids up rather than spread them out, and various different styles, and almost all of them just made from junk. People will say, well, where'd you get the windows? Well, they went down to the scrapyard, where somebody who demolished a home removed the windows and the window frames and has them stacked up where you can buy them used for very cheap, like 50 cents each or something like that, and they brag on how little money it took to put this together. And solar panels for electricity, for instance. Even on cloudy days, the sun will provide enough sunlight to generate electricity. I was surprised at that, but you do not have to have direct sunlight in order to get electricity from your solar panels. And of course, these tiny homes, mobile, that can be hauled around, or houseboat roof. Solar panels. I'm pleased to see some of my neighboring farms here in my region. There they are on their roofs. They have solar panels, or stuck out in the cornfield on a post. And windmills. Smart people know that they need to be off the grid and be prepared for that. And some of these people pump electricity back into the electric companies,
Right.
and basically instead of paying a bill once a month, they get a check from the electric company. If they set it up right, that's what happens. Yeah.
Exactly. And there's a lot of talk out there too about climate change and how it, switching over to these renewables. Skipping around that, renewable energy is just smart to begin with because it is renewable. It comes from you're using like photovoltaic panels, solar panels. You're using power of the sun, the wind. You can also use hydroelectric, or we've talked a lot about that on one of our shows early on.
Yes, we
you
did.
can check it out on the YouTube about
Yes.
off-grid living and how to make power using cordless drills, for example, hooked up to a bicycle. That's human power right there. You put one of the kids on those, and you charge up a battery. You're not going to be running a karaoke machine and blenders and 4 refrigerators and stuff like that. But we're talking about an emergency situation where the grid is down and the sea is rising, or the floods are rising, or the river, or what have you, and you have to go to that location. That location, you can have some of these solar panels or a small little windmill that charges you. The car battery that you use to get to that location, that can be your lifeboat for a little while. I mean,
absolutely.
You don't have to have major investments to be ready for change, is what I'm saying, I guess.
That's exactly right. A battery, flashlight batteries and the like will only last so long. They only go so long, and you have to be prepared. So 12 volt electricity is what a windmill will, or solar panels, and this is really what camping equipment and cars work on. 12 volt electricity. It's direct current, not alternating current, and you have to have your windmill fairly close to where you're going to use the electricity, 50 feet or something like that. Alternating current is needed to send it cross country, on these high tension power lines. So camping gear is great. Anything that's in your car, and what Andre was mentioning, the alternator, which you can have in electric drills or is also in every car. It's actually the copper wire wound round and round a magnet, and it creates electricity from motion, but vice versa. You can have the motion of the windmill or your pumping legs if you're generating and charging the battery from a bike gen. The motion is not, cylinders of gasoline, using up fossil fuels, petrol, but motion. And that works just as well.
Right, and one thing to think about that what would happen if we do have the new Madrid adjustment or any kind of sea level rise that does knock the grid down. The folks that do have generators, that are lucky enough to have those generators, how long will it be before the trucks stop running with the gasoline and the refineries that are messed up and all their pipes are messed up because of shifting earth? There's going to be repairs done there, and the bridges across, major bridges across rivers that the trucks aren't going to be running. It's nice to have.
That's a very good point.
It's nice to have that renewable option or human-powered option or something you can use that doesn't require gasoline, propane, natural gas, those things that you rely on the electric company, the utility company, or your local provider. Or some folks already have, like they might be out in the boonies a bit, and they might have an LP gas tank on their farm or their property. That's not going to be filled. So you got to be smart. You got to be smart and plan out something that you can live off of for an extended period of time.
Right, exactly. And mentioning, the New Madrid and the problem with disrupted distribution of gas and oil, big time. I've looked at some of these maps that show where, for instance, the east coast of the U.S. gets their gas and oil from the Houston area, from the Gulf. these big pipelines, they all go across the Mississippi. Well, the
Mhm.
Mississippi is the low point that's going to rip during a new Madrid. I mean, it is vulnerable. It is low. That's where the water runs because the crust is sagging there. That's only logical. The crust is sagging because it's thin, and therefore that's where water drains. It's seeking its lowest level. So when the New Madrid fault line, which runs right up along the Mississippi, gets up close to the Great Lakes near Chicago and then makes a right-hand turn and runs under the Great Lakes all the way over through Ohio, for instance, well, it's all the way up and down the Mississippi, very vulnerable. Those bridges will rip. Those gas and oil distribution lines will rip. And it's not just the oil spill. You know, you say, well, so there's a rip. So they run and turn it off. They turn off the spigot, right? And we should be okay.
Right.
Oh, no. You're going to have fires breaking out. Every time there's a big fire, the big fires that have hit cities in the past, San Francisco in 1906, et cetera, there's the whole city goes up in flames because all it takes is some spark somewhere. And what are you going to do? You can't pump water. You can't. Your firefighters can't get to the point where they need to. They can't bring the water to the fire. They can't even get to the fire. There's no way to stop it. Everything goes up, and therefore you're going to have that along pipelines. You know, they will if they're not disrupted and broken, they will start exploding from the heat, and the fire will travel along with the pipeline, and boy, are you going to have disrupted distribution. You know, you can't get the trucks in there, the pipelines are broken, and it'll be the people with solar panels and windmills and water mills if they happen to have a high head. You can even get the water that runs off your roof and runs down your drain to generate electricity. I mean, you have to, I'm not saying that you're
Smaller
going to light
motor.
up your house with,
No.
but it
Yeah,
is
it's a much smaller
possible.
motor.
You can do this. If falling water has its own energy, and it's called high head, meaning it goes from a high place to a lower place, such as over a waterfall, etc. And if you've got that arrangement, you can work out the motion to generate electricity. Yes, yeah.
If you can negotiate a 10-foot drop, and it's the angle is relatively steep, as in you can, you know, from your roof, say, to 2 stories is better than 1, you know, 10 feet is about 1 story. That weight of the water can push a wheel that will generate electricity. Again, you have to keep the water moving, otherwise the electricity stops. That's where your 12-volt battery comes into the mix. That holds the energy, and then you can tap off of that. But I've seen some setups where you stick some buckets around an old wagon wheel or a tractor wheel without the tire on it. You just put some half buckets on it and stick it in the creek, and it turns a bicycle cable to a gear that turns an alternator that goes to a battery bank. I mean, these are some of the things you can think about, and it just grows out of that tiny house living or the houseboat living that we're talking about. That if you get your needs down to a certain level, it's very easy to be self-sufficient. Whereas if you're planning on a bigger, you know, the government's going to come help me, I'm going to have full power, and I'm going to hide in my bunker until everything's better kind of mentality, yeah, you know, that might work too. But we're kind of more on the side of let's build it from the stuff we have around us and get through it that way.
Noah had no regrets. He had no regrets
Right.
for what he did, and he planned very carefully for a 2-year period. From what I understand, the old Egyptian records talked about that he built and planned, and it really wasn't as the child's story, you know, 2 by 2 every animal in the world or every creature in the world. It was he was a nobleman. it was he and his household, his servants. He had people that knew how, carpenter, a musician, a beer maker, cheese maker, blah, blah, blah. And all his domestic animals in his household, they loaded up the grain. They had the creatures, the domestic animals down below, and it was very watertight. And it really wasn't so much a boat as, from what I understand, from ancient records, more of a round, so that when we talk about inner tubes having a flotation, and it was something akin to that, so that the idea was that the waves could not tip it over. There was not going to be any way that was going to be tipped over, and it was just going to float until the big wave, the flood, washed him to higher land, or the flood receded, right, and he could get out. 2 years, and he had the sense that something was coming, and he had no regrets. And of course, the stories, and much in the movies and the like, are people screaming and drowning and saying, "Take me in, take me in." All the people that had ridiculed him, and there was no room. They were shutting the doors. That was it.
Yeah. That ties into another show that we've done. For those of you who are new to the Zeta Report on USA EBN, we do the first Monday of every month. Nancy Leader comes on from ZetaTalk.com, and we talk about different subjects pertaining to getting through pole shift or history regarding that. And I know, Nancy, you did, I think it's a book called Finegan Fine, based on the story of houseboat living and a gentleman that goes through a tragic situation and has to do exactly what we're talking about.
Yes.
I'm going to put a link on the chat room for that. If you can talk a little bit about what that story and how you developed that.
I had real fun with that. Actually, Finegan was a real person. He wasn't Irish at all, but he was a real person. And Finegan has a drinking problem, but by the end of the whole story, he's finally overcome demon rum and found love. But this is a real person who had an idea he did have a drinking problem, and had an idea to be a broker, like a barter and exchange, and have a boat and go up and down flooded rivers, and just barter. I've got one of these, and you need one of those, and you've got some vegetables for me, or whatever. So I thought it was a charming idea. So that's what the whole story is about. And meanwhile, it goes around. This is theoretically after a theoretical pole shift has raised the seas around the southeast of the United States, Florida, the Carolinas, and up to Memphis, up the Mississippi, and people, being separated and trying to find their loved ones, that kind of thing, and rescuing people who are sitting on their rooftops, and the like, and the bartering that he does, and the people that he encounters. So, and he has rigged his houseboat, which is just a wooden platform with the usual metal pontoons. The traditional houseboat, if you go to an inland lake and say, well, Sausalito up in near San Francisco has them, and they float on the water, and they look like real houses. They're fairly large. You've Got Mail, that movie, has one where the male Tom Hanks is in Seattle somewhere living on a houseboat. They have these metal pontoons under. Well, that's what Finegan had, but how to move around up and down the rivers and the like. And he had rigged a seat toward the back where he was pushing a water wheel with his feet, like riding a bicycle, so that when he pumped, the pedals, the wheel went round and round, and he could steer with a usual boat, in the back. It was I just had so much fun. One of the chapters is called kudzu canyons, and it's where he encounters people that are living off kudzu, a survival community. Kudzu is a pea plant. In the southeast United States, it's considered a curse, a weed. It came from Japan, but it loved the soil in the southeast United States, and it'll grow over cars, it'll grow over houses, and it just tries to take over the world. Well, I always considered it a terrible pest, but it turns out it's entirely edible. You can feed the greenery to cattle. It's very good provender, and presumably you could eat it yourself. It makes tubers, which can be eaten. They're edible. They're not poisonous. It's a pea plant. It puts nitrogen back in, and so they were eating the kudzu and feeding it to their cows. Now they have milk, and they were digging up the tubers and whacking it up, and making mashed potatoes out of it. And it was kind of a dull diet, but it was nutritious. So kudzu canyons, because this kudzu was running up and down the trees, and they were living in an old recycling plant where they have, you have the crushed cars that you pile one on top of another, and then they haul them off to the steel mill and melt them down. Well, the kudzu was running up these cars, and so they lived in these cars at the top of the pile and would climb down the kudzu like ants leaving an anthill, as I put it. So I had a lot of fun with this because he was brokering and living on the houseboat, and everywhere he went, there was barter. The barter system is increasingly being used around the world. In Greece, they where they had their bankruptcy problem and their own currency was so devalued. In other parts of the world where they have a currency issue and they turn to bartering, this is what he was doing. He would always have something, and he would have boxes and boxes of what would be called junk, except if you need buttons for your outfit and you don't have any, well then the button is worth something, and here, have 3 apples from my apple tree, that kind of thing. I had a lot of fun with it, and it touches on a lot of the social problems that people are going to encounter, not just survival, how to build a windmill, how to make, a wood gas tractor, for instance, because you can retool your tractors and the like to burn wood chips rather than gasoline. And this is something that I recommend. You can pick up off my website. Type in wood gas, and you'll in the search engine, you'll go right there. So that it gave me an opportunity to present different social situations and different survival situations, and I had a lot of fun writing Finegan Fine. Yep.
Yeah, it is. It's really cool the way it comes out, and it kind of addresses a lot of the different issues, especially with the bartering thing, and then also his personal struggles with the addiction too. That's the one thing that a lot of people don't address either, and they're thinking about. There are some out there that are used to certain habits, and sometimes those things go away too. But I did put a link up on that onto the chat room and also onto the Facebook page for the Finegan's Fine story. You can find that on zetatalk.com. Real handy search engine that is available also on. I don't know if we mentioned the secondary site as well, poleshift.ning.com, which is also part of the Zeta Talk family. A lot of great postings there, and that's more of a blog-based website, wouldn't you say, Nancy, as opposed to zetatalk.com, which is more newsletter-based?
Yeah, exactly. And from my website, I produce a weekly newsletter, and I also answer questions that are posed to the Zetas, and that's weekly Q&A. And what the Poleshift Ning blogging does is it's we've restricted our membership to people that will do real news, that are not just asking questions or meandering or talking trash, but actually providing information on various aspects of the Earth changes, volcanic eruptions, sinkholes, crevasses, dropping bridges, earthquakes, sighting the rogue planet Nibiru, finding views of that on SOHO imaging or taking pictures using filters, talking about sociological changes around the world that indicate that this probably, the coming changes that we're experiencing now probably was known to the elite for a number of decades, and there's a cover-up going on, and that the cover-up will break that type of discussion. Survival information, there's quite a bit of information on gardening, how to keep goats, chickens, container gardening, herbal medicine, all different aspects. So, and they blog away and provide information. It's a continuing, a growing resource. And they also have a search engine, so it's quite popular and a real resource. So if you're looking for what are the Earth changes, we don't see this in the news that much.
No.
For instance, fireballs, when they first started coming in and screaming in within the last 5 to 10 years, 2004 and on, fireballs first hit the news, and then they were cut out. And unless you lived in a region where something went screaming overhead, a big bolide, you didn't hear about it. But when it first happened, we were hearing about it. If it happened in New Zealand or running across several provinces of Canada or across half of Europe, it would be in the news everywhere. But now it's restricted down to local news, and that's a type of cover-up. It's same with earthquakes. There's a way to measure the magnitude of an earthquake. A magnitude is not only the force of the jolt, like chung, and everything in your cupboards flies out and falls to the floor, that jolt, but the vast area that it affects. It's the size of the area and the force of the jolt, and combined.
Right.
And those are the factors that go in. Well, or at least over this last 10 years, when we started having the influence of Nibiru, on the Earth, we've seen a gradual, people have reported seeing earthquakes just stripped out of the database so that their numbers are not as apparent. Their frequency isn't as apparent. And also that the magnitudes didn't seem to match what they were seeing was the damage. They were where you would have a 5 and such would happen, and now you would have an earthquake claimed to be a 5, but the buildings that fell down and the vast area affected was so much larger, more like a 7. Now in the opinion of the Zetas, they are saying that magnitudes have been dumbed down almost 2 full magnitudes. Take, for instance, the guy that just happened, I believe it was earlier this morning in Tajikistan. That's one of those stand countries up above the Himalayas, up above India, where India is being jammed under the Himalayas, actually raising the Himalayas up, and it's listed as a 7.3. Well, it's likely a 9. The only way you can tell this is to do a pretty close examination of the vast area affected and how bad the jolt was. The thing about that earthquake is, if you've noticed how many earthquakes have picked up lately, the pace has picked up. Oklahoma is just being hammered with quake swarms. Why the heck would that be? Well, of course, the new Madrid is in the near proximity, but the Zetas, in the opinion of the Zetas, they have said that this jamming of India under the Himalayas is considered what they call the break. That it's holding back plate movement all around the world. But when that happens and you jam India under the Himalayas, and there is sinking going on there, they call it rising seas in Bangladesh and Sri Lanka and along the coastlines of India and Pakistan in the Indus Valley. But it's seawater incursions. Well, if you have rising seas there, you should have rising seas everywhere because water seeks its level, but you don't. So that when you have this happening and the break is being pushed down, and New Zealand and the eastern part of Australia is rising up, and you can see it's outlined with quakes all the time, up along the Ring of Fire, then this allows the Pacific plates to compress, and then that allows South America to pull to the west. Boy, look at the quakes up and down the Andes and all around the Caribbean plate, which is what the Zetas described as the second phase of, they called it the 7 of 10 plate movements, of 10 of 10 being the pole shift. So the the Andes up and down the spine of the Andes in South America just covered with quakes, and the Caribbean plate outlined with quakes. And why aren't we having this in North America? Well, North America is, it's coming. It's being pulled into a bow shape, according to the Zetas, in the opinion of the Zetas, as the Atlantic opens and rips open, and the Pacific tightens and shortens, which is a process going on for eons now, as Pangea, pulled apart from being one big landmass to being the different continents. Well, that pulls the Aleutian Islands and the tip of Mexico toward each other into a bow. That has to happen because as the Atlantic opens, it's pushing Mexico west faster than it is the rest of the North American continent. And so that's curling the North American continent into a bow shape. In the center of that is San Diego and L.A., that region. And it goes right across, the continental United States toward Oklahoma, where they're having this endless quake swarms, toward the New Madrid. And the way that bow finally adjusts is that the New Madrid rips. It relieves the stress of the bow by having the whole southeast portion shift northeast, while the rest of the North American continent shifts southwest. And boy, that's going to be a big one.
We talk a lot about these plate movements and, the effects of that on the different areas, but what I get a lot of questions about, other than dates, which we don't discuss dates, we discuss what's happening around you. The Zetas have mentioned, though, one date in particular in regards to the North American plate movement and New Madrid in specific, that it will start, and correct me if I'm wrong with the quote, the rip will start in 2015 this year.
Yes.
We're in December now.
Did. Yes, exactly.
There have been some quakes down there. They're smaller, but there have been some quakes.
Yeah, exactly. They described the whole New Madrid process in their prediction, in the opinion of the Zetas. It was going to start out with magnitude 7s and 8s, up and down the Mississippi, and then we'd finally get to a big one, which is a magnitude 9, which would rip all the bridges up and down the Mississippi, etc., and ring the bells up in Boston as the last adjustment did, and the like. So, 7s and 8s, which would be declared to be 5s now, because if you consider that we're dumbing down the magnitude, 5s and 6s. So they said this process will start before the end of 2015. And yes, we're talking 3 weeks, so there does seem to be a tremendous amount of tension, rock tension, something that has been described as the reason pets leave home and run away from home is what the Zetas call electromagnetic screech. When there's pressure in the rock because it's being compressed or pulled apart, or there's movement, and even before a quake relieves that stress in some way and repositions all the rock layers or whatever, the slip slide fault lines, this kind of pressure and tension on the rock is squeezing out air pockets so that the rock and the water in the rock are continuous. And you know how electricity loves to go to water. If there's you don't dare walk in the water if there's a live wire somewhere because it'll run through the water. It's a conduit. So therefore, when the rock is pressed, electricity can run through the rock, and this distresses pets and domestic animals, which is why Jim Bergman in the West Coast, who was quite good at predicting earthquakes in the West Coast, used to watch the newspapers for missing pets. People were looking for their pets. It meant that there was going to be likely a quake.
Oh, sure.
This also causes static in radios. And I went out to the West Coast to live and work there in 1989, right after the new Loma Prieta earthquake. And I remember talking to somebody who said the 2 days ahead of that quake, which was its epicenter was there in Santa Cruz, when you drove past that epicenter, you couldn't pull in the radio stations. There was just nothing but static. So that is another clue that there's electromagnetic screech going on. Well, one thing that does, with the charged tail of Nibiru, which is wafting around, which is why we have a lot more red dust, a lot more red sunsets and the like, orange snow up there in Siberia, etc., etc. We recently had blue neon clouds off the coastline of L.A., and it suddenly caused L.A. airport to say planes landing and leaving have to go over land rather than out over the water. Well, electromagnetic distress, arcing, can affect airplanes, and you don't want them over water because that encourages, this electromagnetic pulse. All of a sudden, they said, all the planes have to go over land, not over water, and there was no warning. And then they said, that was because we're doing missile tests from submarines out there. But you would have a little notice of a day or two. It was like sudden, and people all the way over to Arizona were saying, well, we saw those blue neon swirly things that were supposed to be rockets. Well, it's not rockets. It's a blue neon electromagnetic kind of cloud. Here again, right in the center of the bow of the North American plate. And that's where this kind of electromagnetic screech was creating this display and causing the LA airport to reroute their planes, which they did, and we had no planes go down. Good for them, that they took steps. So it also interferes with radar. At that same time, we had Sweden had radar problems. They didn't let planes take off or land until that alleviated. So and also around the Sinai Peninsula where the Russian plane went down, they didn't let planes fly over the Red Sea or the Gulf of Aqaba, which is on the eastern side of the Sinai, because the African role, which is described in Zeta Talk in the opinion of the Zetas, Africa is pulling and rolling toward the east, its top part toward the east, and pulling the Sinai apart. So therefore that's a dangerous place to be flying planes. So we can see that North America in the 7 of 10 sequence, right now we've got Indonesia. Yes, they are sinking as predicted. It's not just rain, and the mayor of Jakarta said they're going to have to move that city to Borneo, which is a high island, also part of Indonesia. Move the whole darn city, And that's not because they're having rain. They're sinking because that Sonda plate tongue is being pushed down. India is being pushed under the Himalayas. New Zealand and Eastern Australia are rising. The Pacific is shortening. The South America is rolling. Its top part is tipping over. The Caribbean is being pushed down, so there will be some islands that will be flooded there. And North America is due for the new Madrid rip, which will be horrific. Horrific.
Right.
Yep.
So let's get ready for it. Yeah.
Don't be shy about being Noah. Get going.
Right.
Get your pontoons
get to it.
ready. Yeah, get
exactly.
your bamboo lined up, whatever. Yep.
Whatever it takes. Get to high ground if you can't. Get
yes,
your boat ready.
You'll be fine. Eat seaweed, catch fish. Yep. And have your lights strung out because you've got a little windmill up there. Yep.
Nice.
Very romantic.
Well, thanks a lot, Nancy, for the show today. Again, always great to have you on, and a partnership with ZetaTalk.com and USA EBN. Has always been fruitful, and I know what you generally do is you'll put the show up on your YouTube channel, so you can tell the folks out there where to find that, and that'd be great.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much, and I love being on, and see you next month.
Thanks a lot. You've been listening
now.
You've been listening to the Zeta Report here on USA Emergency Broadcasting Network. We are live the first Monday of each month, 5 p.m. Eastern Time, but you can also find us on our podcast on our main page, usaebn.org, and also on the Zeta Report on YouTube. Look it up, Nancy Leader, YouTube, zetatalk.com, usaebn.org. Stay safe out there.